Hey guys, Alex from 734 Speed here. We are back to continue taking apart the Mazdaspeed3 engine. So I think what we're going to do is kind of get rid of some clutter in the engine bay, start kind of taking some stuff off there. We'll start with like the coolant tank, maybe some wiring harnesses, ECU, then work our way over to like the intake, the catch cans, maybe the downpipe off of the turbo. Still undecided if I'm going to pull the exhaust manifold and the turbo. I think I might, just to make the whole engine removal process a little bit easier, a little bit more room to work. That way we don't hurt nothing there. But yeah, let's get on with the video. Let's start with pulling this coolant reservoir. So pulling the coolant reservoir is simple enough. We already have one of our radiator lines off from the last episode. So all we got to do is pull off this side, and then we have two little clips. Stick a screwdriver in there, kind of bend the metal part out of the way. One on the front, and I believe there's one on the back side down in there, right there. So we'll get that out of the way. That'll give us room when it comes time to pull the engine to have access to our passenger side motor mount. Alright, so we got the coolant tank off. Did forget to mention, you will have to disconnect the radiator hose coming from the bottom of the tank. I did end up just taking that whole entire upper radiator hose line off. Connected over on this side, right there to the block by the EGR valve and this larger radiator tube, which you see I've spliced and put a adapter in so I can have a coolant temp sensor for the Innovate Motorsports coolant temp gauge. So yeah, we'll just throw that into storage. I don't think I'm going to be reusing this because I do have a Mishimoto kit, but always good to keep all these just for backups or whatnot. So yeah, I guess the next thing we'll do, now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and let's just take this strut tower bar off. I'll leave the mounts in place. I'll just take the bolt off on both sides. That'll kind of just give me more room in general to work. Like I said, just kind of taking the easy little accessories off in this episode, getting the engine bay all cleaned up and looking nice. Alright, so the strut tower bar is off now. Next thing we're going to do is pull this ECU, which is easy enough. Simply just push down the tab back here, flip back this white little lever. Show right here. And then these connectors just pull right off. And I have my ECU mounted just by a bolt here off of the strut tower. Yours, if it's stock, will be on the battery box. But for just making more room, we put the battery in the trunk and move the ECU over here. So I'll take that off. I'm also going to mark with one Sharpie dot on the top one connector, and then I'll put a Sharpie dot on this heat wrap over here, and I'll do 2 dots on the bottom one, 2 dots on here. That way I just remember which connector goes to where on the ECU. That was a tip that I got from Whitezilla, another Mazdaspeed3 YouTube and Instagram account. Got the ECU out now. I think the next step, continuing just to remove little things from the engine bay, we're going to remove this radiator hose here. Probably just disconnect our sensor here for the Innovate Motorsports gauge. Put a tag on that and kind of tuck it away where it'll be safe. This radiator hose comes off at that elbow where it goes into the block, right by the EGR, or where the EGR used to be. Now that the coolant hose is off, I think the next step is let's go ahead and pull this upper wiring harness that you see here. It connects to a bunch of different places. See, we got it coming. Here's the main bracket, goes all the way up. High pressure fuel pump, kind of routes around back. And then you see we got sensor up here, the coil packs. And I believe there's a couple more sensors in the back that it connects to, if I remember right. It's been so long since I've worked on this car. It's been sitting for about 4 months since I moved houses, and just kind of been waiting for this build. So got that harness most of the way off. You can see it sitting over here. Basically just taped up everything as I went. And I realized that this harness is actually connected to the one that goes underneath the intake manifold. So guess that means we got to pull the intake, which is never a fun task with this JMF intake. It's actually not that bad, except for the bolt down there. Absolutely sucks to get off. But essentially, just to remove this, move your map sensor. This goes to a catch can, brake booster, evap solenoid, and then this one's disconnected. It was going to the tile bypass valve. Once those hoses are disconnected, just take off the bolts holding that on. If I remember right, we do have to take the pulley off in order to get this pulley bracket off, and then that'll give us better access to get into the flange bolt that's back in there. I know it's kind of hard to see, but basically it's like this lower flange bolt only on that side. So we'll pull the belt off, pull this bracket off. We're going to have to bend this AC line out of the way and start taking this intake off. So we got the belt off now. Taking the belt off was easy. You got a 14mm bolt on the tensioner pulley, which is the one right down there at the bottom. Move the tensioner, pull the belt off. Next thing I did was bend this AC line carefully out of the way, carefully pull this harness back, and there's 3 bolts, 2 on the top, 1 on the bottom, that hold that tensioner pulley on. Once that pulley is off, then we can have access to the intake manifold. So we got that idler pulley off. Now you can see the bolt on the flange of the intake that we need to get access to. Also went ahead, disconnected my Corksport 3.5 bar map sensor, the hoses for the catch can, brake booster, evap, and bypass valve. So now that we got all that freed out, I also took off the oil dipstick. That just comes right out of the block, right down there, pops right out, no problem. So we'll go ahead and pull this intake manifold off now. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Allen bolts we have to remove, and then the whole thing should just come right out. Alright, so we have the intake manifold off now. That actually wasn't as bad as I remember it being. I've done this probably 4 times, taking the intake off, but never without having the front clip. And without the front clip in there, it makes that job so easy. It only took me about 15 minutes to pull that manifold off, as opposed to like an hour and a half like normal. But anyways, now that we have this off, we can cut loose the rest of our wiring harness. Here's the plug connector for it, and then that will take this whole harness off and out of the way. After that, might as well get these catch cans out. You see the Damon PCV plate right there. So those 3 hoses will come out, and then it's just a mounting bracket over on the frame rail. Pulls out our dual catch can setups. Should probably drain them first before I pull them out. Who knows how much blow by and shit is in there, judging off what we saw in the turbo. But yeah, making progress slowly and steadily. It's actually not as bad as I thought it would be. Everything's gone pretty easy so far, knock on wood. So I will update you guys when that harness is off. So we got the harness off, continuing to mark every single little connector that I touch and take off. Now it's time to take these catch cans off. So we got our oil catch can setup out. Essentially all it did was both catch cans mounted right there to the frame. You can see now that Damon Motorsports PCV plate. Awesome piece of work there. Really happy with all of Damon's products. But as you can see, motor's starting to become more visible. More junk is coming out of the way. From here, I guess we can either start pulling like fuel rail, fuel lines, just some more kind of wiring stuff up front to clear the path straight out, or we can start pulling like the turbo, exhaust manifold, downpipe. I'm gonna have to sit on that. It's lunchtime. Gonna take a quick break here and come back and start tearing this motor down even further. Alright, so we're back. I think what we're going to do is pull this low pressure side fuel line. What that'll do is give me access to the hose clamp right below it, which connects the purge valve solenoid. Get that out of the way, take the other fuel line off, and then start working on the fuel system. But just wanted to get this out of the way because it's an easy thing, and it just helps kind of clean up this mess a little bit for now. Okay, so now that both of my fuel lines are off, I've taped up the ends of the high pressure fuel pump and marked where the high pressure fuel pump low side line is. I have access to take off the purge valve solenoid just by taking that clip off, sliding this back, and then we also have an electrical connector on the actual solenoid itself, and this line that goes to the intake manifold. So we got the purge valve solenoid line out of the way, taped up the hose connector on the firewall where that goes to. I think the next step, I was going to pull the fuel rail and all that stuff, but I think I kind of want to get rid of these harnesses up front first and just really clean it up. It looks like this harness comes all the way over from the fuse box and goes like deep into the fender. I traced it back, it kind of goes up and then back around. It comes out over here somewhere. It's really kind of funky, so I don't know. I think that's going to be my next task. Pull that off, and then even maybe like the AC lines, this harness, the harness back here. Just kind of get this wiring out. There's my daily driver, 2015 STI. Little sidetrack. We'll be doing a build documentary on that probably later next year. After this one's done, of course, but that'll be built sometime. But yeah, onward with the Speed 3. So I'm starting to make progress on pulling this front wire loom. Goes all the way back. Started with, there's a sensor right on an AC line that's tucked behind the strut tower. Kind of goes up near the top of the strut tower, connects to the wheel speed sensor. Then it runs along the frame. It actually tucks in the frame inside here, and then it meets up with the headlight wiring harness. So I'll pop that little grommet out that's holding that in place. Then it looks like it goes underneath, kind of down towards the windshield wiper motor, or not motor, but the pump for the fluid, power steering, and snakes over. So this is more or less just to help me when I'm putting this thing back together to kind of remember where everything goes, but hopefully it helps you guys out. Alright, so continuing to work this thing back, here's where the headlight plug was. There was a cluster of grounds that were put into this bolt right here, and then a single ground wire was on this bolt back here. There were a couple, one of those like hanger clips along the line here. So now we've kind of got this one of the main tees off. So from here we got a larger ground going to that little post, and then we can follow it down. We have this goes to the fog lights, and then we can start getting into this few ones right here. We got one unused. This guy goes to the washer pump, and then two to the power steering. I believe I might have to pull this in order to get down in there. I'll have to look at that a little bit better. But once this half's off, we can continue to move down, and that's pretty much the last little bit. Because once we get past here, this is all free hanging, and we get into the fuse box. I'm probably just going to zip tie it all together and let it hang off the bumper, just so it's out of the way. Alright, so I decided to end up pulling the washer tank, or windshield wiper tank. It was easy enough to do. There's a bolt right here. There's a nut right here. And then on the top of the tank, it's actually right here, there's a nut and bolt that go through there. So now we have access to our two power steering pump connectors. Probably could have got it without pulling the washer tank, but it took like 5 minutes, so why not? Once those are out though, this whole loom is pretty much free, I believe. So there might be a couple little connectors on here, but we'll see as we go. Alright, so that came off easy. There was one little grommet holding it over in here. Rolled it up into a nice little loom and got it sitting on the frame rail now. So that opened up the whole middle of the car a lot. It does go into this resistor, which I'm not going to touch. There's just no need to. And from there it goes into the bottom of the fuse box, into these grounds. I may take this off later down the road, maybe further into the build, just to clean up this blue overspray that the previous owner spray painted his fuse box and didn't tape up right. I did notice though, I took off the fuse box cover. There is a connector that we can remove that should free up most, if not all, of this whole harness right here. I believe it's still connected into a couple places, so I'll dig into that and update you guys when I'm done. So diving down into this harness mess a little bit more, what we got is basically these go up to the fuse, or sorry, the ECU. We had a, that's the back side, so apologize folks, trying to record and look at the same time. MAF sensor, we had a power for the starter. This went up to my negative fuse block. The power for the starter went to the positive fuse block. Watching this kind of come back, it snakes back here where we have two plugs for our O2 sensor, and then down there we actually have our lower O2 sensor that comes up from down there. This is unused. This is the old EGR plug. So from here, looks like we have a ground bolt right there. We got, I think this is how we release this whole clip section together. And then that comes up and meets with this, which this end went to the fuse block and MAF sensor, and the other end kind of snakes around the front of the engine and goes to the starter. So this one shouldn't be too bad to pull. Like I said, no mechanic. This is my first time, so hope it's turning out all right for you guys watching. No professional cameraman. I'm just recording off my phone, trying to document everything I do here. Alright, so that harness came off in one big clump. Really freed up all inside there. You can see that's where that ground was. And then I just cut this zip tie because I didn't feel like dicking around in there. That's where the big brace mounted to. And it comes up. Looking down over here, looks like we got a couple grounds, a big one and two small ones. And then we got a couple connectors in here that I have no idea what to do with, so I'll just name them like starter 1, starter 2. If I don't know what the connectors are, I just kind of get a general region and then number them, or number on both sides just so I remember. And then looks like we get a plug into the starter. From there, this whole harness, oh geez, it goes up and all the way back to the alternator. So this is a pretty long harness. It's getting kind of late in the night, so I think I'll just do the starter, a couple ones real quick, and then finish the other half of this tomorrow. Alright, so I got this whole mess kind of free. There's where the two grounds were. There were two connectors hidden back behind there, plus this third one was kind of nested up in there as well. Took that nut off to release kind of the main power for the starter, and there's a small connector right behind, or right underneath the main connector for the starter. Once that's off, this loom will be basically free up until we get to the knock sensor over there, and then it kind of cuts off. We have our MAF sensor right here. These wires I'll take off. These are coming down to my Cork Sport sandwich plate, and that's for oil pressure and oil temp. So I'll get rid of those two. Those are just ran up with this harness, so I'll just keep that together. And tomorrow I'll continue pulling the rest of this. Alright, so we're back at it today, pulling more of this main wiring harness. First thing I did was disconnected this wire from the starter, worked my way back, and there is the knock sensor, the AC, and down here is the map sensor. So map, AC, and knock all right there. I also disconnected my oil temp and oil pressure sensors from the Cork Sport sandwich plate. So I'm just going to keep working my way up. Alright, so following that harness up, we have the VVT solenoid. The harness then goes back behind here, connects to the alternator, and it looks like it drops down below the alternator, maybe I believe the crankshaft position sensor. Don't quote me on that, but we will find out as we dig in a little bit deeper. But it's pretty much almost all free. So definitely a lot of wiring. Nice to get that all out of the way. Alright, so we got the last of the harness disconnected. This ran all the way down and behind the axles to the crankshaft position sensor. It had some mount that wasn't hooked up, so I don't know if I previously removed this in the past or if the old owner did or what, but you can see the axle's fucked by how much grease is just all over this thing. Anyways, one 12mm bolt held on the power for the alternator. Then you also have this other cable for the alternator. VVT sensor. Once those were off, the whole entire harness is now free all the way up to the fuse box. So let's pull this out and see what to do next. Alright, so it looks a lot cleaner now. Just to show you guys how much wiring there is. There's this whole loom, which is twisted up a couple times. And then over here, we've got two more just giant messes of wire everywhere. I know it's dark, so it's kind of hard to see, but all three wiring harnesses are all disconnected with the exception of this one, just because that goes into the bottom of the fuse box, which I don't want to touch, but it's out of the way, so that's all that matters. So after this, I think we can start pulling these AC lines, just get them out. They just connect right down here to the compressor. I believe 10mm bolts, one holds each of them on. And then I'll probably just move this out of the way, take it off the bracket maybe. I don't know if I'm going to disconnect it from in the cabin yet. I'm still debating on whether or not I want to keep the AC or not. Kind of leaning towards deleting it because this is going to be more of a race car build than a street car. But it is really nice to have on those hot, humid summer days. So I don't know how much I'll be driving this around town. That's my thoughts on why I would want to delete it. But again, it is nice to have, so I don't know what to do with that yet. Still got to think on that. But let's continue cleaning this engine bay up. We're getting pretty close to being done. Not much more. Probably just disconnect the downpipe turbo and exhaust manifold to get that out of the way. And then we can start working on like shift linkages, the slave cylinder, draining all of the transmission and engine oil. And then after that we can pull the axles and motor mounts and then just get this thing right out of here. Alright, so we got the AC lines off. I just tucked this one back here. I also noticed a ground that was connected to the back of the valve cover right in this corner area. So I undid that. I think the next step is let's go ahead and pull these coolant lines. So this is where it goes into the tank. There's 2 clips holding it to the frame rail here. And then back behind our fuel pressure sensor, there's a clamp where it connects to the thermostat. And there's also another hose going from that same area. So you get a better shot of it. Right above it. That goes down and goes into the oil cooler. So we can go ahead and remove that line as well. I don't know if I want to remove the line coming up here yet. I don't even know if that's possible. I'm sure it is once I get deeper down into this. Actually, that goes into the firewall right here. So we'll probably pull that after. I'll have to look more into how to do that. But let's start with taking these off first. So we got those coolant lines off. I did have to remove the fuel pressure sensor cable just to get better room to it. That's been relocated to fit the JMF intake manifold. I think the next thing I'm going to do is work on getting this coolant line off. It runs all the way to the back to the firewall, feeds the turbo. In order to do that, to get access to it, there's this plate here. It's held on by 2 bolts on the transmission. And that held, this is where the 2 grounds were for the starter, and it's got braces for these wires that go back to the transmission. So we'll unclip those wires, remove those 2 screws. I'll just set the wires over here by this mess for now, and then once we have more room, we'll continue working back. Alright, so we got that bracket off. There's actually another bolt underneath it, so there's 3 bolts holding that bracket on, and then there was a bolt right here that held on this little mounting bracket for those 2 wires going to the trans. So now we have a lot more room to get into here and pull this coolant line off. This is where it did go into the throttle body, so that was deleted right there. Goes into the neck right there, and all the way back to the firearm. It does T right in right there. I believe that goes to the turbo if I remember right. Alright, so that line was a little bit more of a pain in the ass than I thought it would be. It bolted right to the top of the starter here as like a mounting bracket. Came up, went all the way through here. Right here is where the throttle body bypass connected to. Went all the way up into this. This hose was the one that gave me trouble. You see I bled all over fucking turbo. Split my knuckle open a couple times. So that hose sucked to get off, but we managed to make it. So next is just to disconnect this coolant hose. It goes back into the firewall. And that just connects to the bottom of that neck. See, it's all corroded there. I'm going to see if I can get a new one of those replacements. Or, I don't know, maybe the new block even comes with one. But yeah, let's get this hose off next. Now that that coolant line's off, I think the next thing I'm going to do is pull this fuel rail. Very easy. 2 bolts holding this fuel line on, and then you got 5 bolts across the top. You pull it from this side out. Sometimes you got to get a breaker bar in there. Just be really careful against the cylinder head. And be careful not to break any of the O-rings, because when I did this last time to do the injector seals on this, I tore like half the O-rings, and the Mazda dealership does not like to be cheap with those. They are like $15 per O-ring, and there's like 4 O-rings per injector, so just be careful with it. Take your time, and it does come off fairly easy once you kind of find the groove to how to pull it. Alright, so that wasn't that bad at all to get off. Thankfully, I managed to not fuck up any of the injector O-rings. But now that that's off, it gives me access to pull this last wiring harness, and I do believe that is the actual last wiring harness in this engine bay, believe it or not. I'll leave the injectors in for now. At some point I got to take those out and get them sent to Injector RX to be cleaned, because I refuse to pay $240 per injector when they're only going to be used for secondary injection, essentially, because port injection, which is going to be off the intake manifold, becomes our main source of fueling. So let's get that off. Looks like there is another coolant hose that I can pull. It goes from there just to the bottom of that whole neck assembly. So we can pull that, just get it out of the way, get that wiring harness out, and then after that maybe AC compressor, starter, oil cooler, and I believe that'll be all I do on the front. After that, we'll get the few things off the back and wrap this video up. I know it's probably getting pretty long, I can imagine. Alright, so we got that harness off. We also got that coolant line off that went from there to underneath there. For some reason, that injector harness was unusually a pain in the ass to get off. It took me like 20 minutes. I don't know why. It's just every injector wanted to fight me. But on to the next step. Now, keep in mind, none of this is probably needed right now. This could all be done when the engine's out. But might as well make it easier. Just do it now. I'm in no rush. We got till the spring before we can drive this in anyways, because Michigan roads and power don't go together in the winter. But yeah, let's keep on trucking with it. So the next thing I want to do is let's just get the starter off. I believe it's just 2 bolts, one right here and one right there holding this on. So that should be easy enough. We'll get the starter off and then get the oil cooler off. Got the starter off. Next thing we want to do is remove the oil cooler. So the first thing we want to do for that is get under the car, drain the oil, remove the oil filter. That will allow us to get our sandwich plate off. Then we will take this bolt off on the top. That'll remove the oil cooler from the housing. And we'll probably just take the housing off too, because I know that has to get swapped over to the new engine when that comes tomorrow morning, because it got delayed thanks to pilot services. But again, no rush, so let's get to taking that off. So the oil's taking its sweet ass time draining. It is all of like 5 degrees in here right now, so pretty thick. While I'm waiting for that to drain, because it is taking some time, I'm just going to remove these 4 bolts holding on the AC compressor and just get that out of the way. Okay, so the AC compressor's off. The damn oil's still draining, so might as well just get this knock sensor out of here just so that doesn't get hurt. Probably going to end up replacing that. Just a lot of these sensors are going to get replaced. Just because this does have an unknown amount of miles on it, and might as well just have fresh parts. The more I've been thinking about it, the more I think I am going to go with an AC delete. I don't know if I'm going to do a different, like a idler pulley in the spot, or do the alternator there, because there is a form showing how to do bringing the alternator to the front instead of the back and put it up there. Still kind of looking into my options, but kind of leaning towards the alternator in the front, just because I do need a new alternator, and I believe it's out of a Mazda 5, and about half the cost as the radiator. What is going on? The alternator for this car, and it'll free up room back in the downpipe, and supposedly the better airflow allows for cooler engine bay temps, but who knows. Anyways, off track. Let's get that knock sensor out. So the oil's finally done being drained. Got the oil filter off. Next step is to go underneath this Cork Sport adapter and pull that little adapter nut off right there. That'll allow us to drop our adapter plate down, and then we can remove this bolt and take the oil cooler off, and then after that we'll go to the housing. Alright, so we got the oil cooler off. Last thing to do on the front of the motor, as far as I can tell, is going to be to remove this oil housing here. I think we will keep the PCV plate on for now, the injectors in for now. There's just no need to pull that. That can wait. Mainly because I'm running kind of out of places to put all this shit that I'm pulling off. But yeah, this is easy enough. 4 bolts hold that on. I believe we may have to remove this sensor to get down into here, that bolt, if I remember right. For some reason, I think I remember having a clearance issue with the socket, but I'll update if that's the case. So let's pull that off. Alright, got the oil cooler housing off. Don't know what I was talking about. All 4 bolts came out just fine, didn't have to remove that sensor. I did forget, put an oil pan down. You will drip a lot of oil. So now I gotta go find some kitty litter to throw under there because there's a giant mess under that pan. But I'll worry about that later today. I guess with the front being all basically stripped down to nothing, the next step be to remove the downpipe, alternator, exhaust manifold, heat shield, because that's got a mounting point for my O2 sensors. And then the turbo with the coolant line and the oil drain line, probably the oil feed line might as well. And I'll leave the exhaust manifold in because I'm missing the bracket to use as a hook point. So I will be using one of the runners on the manifold to help lift this engine out. So yeah, basically downpipe, alternator, turbo, and turbo coolant oil lines, and we should be ready to move on to the axles after that. Alright, so this bad lad just arrived. Quirk Sport Dankai 2 long block, good for 750 horse. They even threw in some goodies. Got a Ultimate Mazda Performance Guide, t-shirt, Rice Krispie treats, little bottle opener. Pretty badass. Let's see, we got our blueprint. Braking instructions. Oh, I can't wait to get this in the car. That is dope. But for now, we gotta focus on getting this one out. So we got the alternator off. That was held in by 3 bolts, 1 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Freed us up a lot of room to get to our oil feed line. O2 sensors. This one right here is the primary O2 sensor. This one right here, or sorry, backwards. This one right here is the primary O2 sensor. This one goes to the Innovate Motorsports gauge. And those are mounted just with little zip tie mounts to the Quirk Sport exhaust manifold heat shield. So what we'll do to get this downpipe, really, I'm going to have to pull it from the car eventually, but it'll be easier to pull it all the way out when the motor's out. There's 5 bolts all around this downpipe that we have to get off. I'm going to pull the O2 sensors out and just get them out of the way first, and I'll probably remove this Quirk Sport manifold heat shield just to give me a little bit more room in there as well. So we got the downpipe disconnected from the turbo. That manifold heat shield's off. Next step, we're going to take this oil feed line going to the turbo off from the block down there, as well as up top, if it's not too much of an issue. I do remember that being a pain in the ass when I installed this turbo. We can also disconnect our coolant hose. The return, which I believe is on the back, has already been disconnected. Forget which one's the return. I'm pretty sure this is the feed. But we can disconnect that from the block, kind of let it hang. Once our oil feed line is off, we can go down underneath, and I'll show you guys the wastegate and the oil drain line. But once those lines are off and the wastegate's off, there's only 4 bolts on the top of the manifold holding the turbo in. We can pull the turbo out through the side, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next episode where we go over pulling the axles and removing the actual engine. Alright, so we undid the coolant line from the EGR plate. We also undid the oil feed line all the way back to the block. That's removed now. So let's go underneath the car and I'll show you guys the oil drain as well as what we got to do for the wastegate. So coming under here, there's the oil drain. Basically one big fitting pulls that off, and there's the tile wastegate with the dump tube. So we could probably leave the dump tube on. You can see there's a V-band clamp on top of the wastegate. We'll just simply remove that clamp, pull the wastegate out of the way so that it doesn't get hurt when we're pulling the turbo, and we'll be ready to remove the turbo after that. Okay, so I was having issues getting the wastegate off the V-band that connects to the turbo. So I just pulled the turbo with the wastegate on it, and I'll deal with that later. But here's where we're at now. We are ready to start pulling the axles. Once the axles are out, we can get the motor mounts and get this thing out. There's no more turbo. All we have is the exhaust manifold, which I'm going to use as a hook point to pull this thing out of here. And yeah, but that'll be next episode. So, tripping over shit here. There she is. Covered a lot in this one. I know this episode's probably getting pretty long. So, thank you guys. Appreciate you watching. Hope this helps. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I'll try and answer it to my best of my abilities. That girl is gonna go in there soon. So if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, comment if you have any questions. Also follow me on Instagram at 734_speed, same as the YouTube channel. Have a good one, guys. See you on the next episode when we start pulling this whole entire motor out.